Go. No
Oh,
Luddite. No Luddite here. I got my background on.
hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Good to be seen.
Craig, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. And Rick's there too.
Hey,
Awesome.
Skipper.
I'll unmute. Hello. Hey, Craig.
Hi, Marianne.
There's Rick.
Marianne, you've
Hi,
got
Rick.
some long hair.
Hi, Craig.
Wow. Hi,
I
Denise.
still have hair.
Hey, Craig.
Very, very long hair.
All right, now that we're all pumped up. We had about 31 people sign up, so that's exciting. So we'll give it a couple. It's just now 6. It's just now 7, so we'll give it a couple of minutes.
Craig, I was in
Yeah.
Westchester about a month ago and thought of you. My goodness, it's changed. You'd never believe Westchester, Pennsylvania, or the Westchester University now.
Did you go to school there, Denise?
My first year, yep. I was a prerequisite phys ed major.
Because I was there for 3 years.
Yep. I remember that connection.
Yeah. 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 I still have trauma when I think about it. It was really hard for me. It was so conservative. And my male teachers now, just, they were actually very mean to me.
Oh no.
Yeah. It was hard. Are you working this? Oh, here we go. Hey, Richard.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. As we all come in, good to see everyone. Some folks back from last month. Awesome.
Where are all these old people?
Ed, good to see you again.
Yeah, I'm still here.
That's awesome.
Woohoo!
Hey, Jed.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Good. We've just been catching up with our 80s group.
There's Medrick down in his den with 4,000 magazines and 5,000 books, and he's never going to be able to downsize until I come out there with a moving truck and a bulldozer.
Better believe it.
Well, it's good to have good friends who will help you move, I guess.
Yeah, we had 2 daughters that helped us move.
Nice.
And boy, were they happy when it was done. Whew. Yeah.
Right. Well, waiting for you, Jed.
What?
Waiting for you.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, I'm not coming out west.
Darn.
Katie, nice to see you, and I'm happy to see that you have the younger generation of AE with us tonight, too.
Thank you. And I'm here. My mom is Peggy Stevens. So I was a little baby when she was president of AE, and I've heard stories, and I'm really excited to hear her talk. She's on the panel tonight. So, and these are my sons. So nice to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you. That's awesome.
We'll be sure to tell some stories.
We've been talking about how we're at the point now where there's generations of AEers, and it's been we could do a whole panel on that, generations of AE.
Yeah, I was hoping to get my daughter Heather in on this because she was part of the Russian exchange back in the 90s.
Oh yeah.
But we'll save that for the 90s. Yeah.
Awesome.
She went to Barniola with Brian Coons and so forth as part of an AEE experiential consortium.
Yeah.
Little baby Heather, who is now 53.
That's amazing how that happens. Well, it's 7:04. We're going to go ahead and get started to make sure we have time for everybody tonight. Thank you all for joining us. We're so excited to have this Circle Up 80s edition. We are moving through our generations in order to get to our 50th at the conference in November. And yeah, we're excited to have our panel for tonight. Obviously, this isn't everybody who was involved in AE in the 80s. We tried to find folks, invite people. Some people were busy. Some people couldn't make it. All kinds of different things. Some people we couldn't find. Some people I stalked on Facebook and LinkedIn and found them. And so we're glad to have who we have tonight. And I'm going to let them, I'll go through and say your name and you can introduce yourself. We're going to try to keep the introductions to about a minute. But I know sometimes that can go over, but we're going to start with Mike Gass. Oh, and I forgot to introduce myself. Sorry. I am, if anything seems a little off, I'm getting over COVID right now, and I've definitely had a little brain fog happening. I'm Sherry Bagley. I'm the Executive Director of AEE, so welcome. Mike, go ahead and get started.
You're muted, brother.
Okay. My name is Mike Gass, and I too am suffering 6 days into my COVID experience. And I got it via my wife's first grade class. So that's how I got it there. I'm a 44-year member of the association. And I first joined in 1980, and I was denied going to the first conference because Dr. Ziegler said, if Rita and Craig are going to go from Towson State, we need someone to run the outdoor ed program here. So I got to stay home and they got to go to, I think that was at Santa Fe, that one there. So wise choice on his part. I've been lucky enough just to experience the lives of the many people that are here, and I'll hopefully get to talk about them in a little bit. But Christian, you're next.
Greetings, Christian 18. My first conferences was a Northeast Regional in 86, and then Moodus in 86. Involved doing experiential ed stuff since the early 80s. And I think we're talking about roles. I've served on the board 3 times, president twice of the board, served on multiple regional conference committees from the Northeast to the Rocky Mountains to the West, and chair of Therapeutic Adventure Professional Group, and a bunch of other things during that time. So look forward to hearing more from other folks. I'll pass it to Peggy.
I am Peggy Walker Stevens. I guess my first conference was 1978. And then I have a lifetime membership to AE that I was given when I got off the, well, I guess when I was on the board from 80 to 83, I was president from 82 to 83, and then I was the editor of the journal for 5 years after that. And so then after that, I got a lifetime membership. So here I am. Let's see, how about Marianne?
I guys counted up the years. I haven't counted my years up there. My experience with AE started in the late 70s with a lot of regional activity in the Northeast. I used to live in Connecticut. I was a conference convener for that infamous Moodus conference in 1986, where we were talking earlier about all the eclairs we all ate and how much fun that was. Over the years, I think I served either 9 or 10 years on the board, and I was president for 4 of those years, or chair, or whatever we're calling it now. I also helped worked with Zeke Zelliff, and we started the conference advisory committee sometime, I think it was in the early or mid 80s, I don't remember. And then I served on that probably for 10 years. And then, so I've been involved over the years. And let's see what else. I currently live in Virginia, and I have a small business that is still doing experiential leadership and team development, and I love it. Love what I do. So let's go over to Simon Priest.
Hi, I've been with AE from about 1983, and I left in about 2005. I have been on conference steering committees, editorial board for the journal, wrote a bunch of books, chaired the task force on safety practices, the one on student grants, the one on research evaluation, and I was a member of task forces for program accreditation, student scholarships, and the experience-based training and development group. Couple of things I'm probably most proud of is that Dan Garvey made me, when he was executive director, their international ambassador for about a decade, and I expanded the membership outside of the United States with a lot of Canadians, Australians, and others. And the second thing is the Clearinghouse Information Project that we recently started, which I hope you'll look at on the AEE website. And I'll pass it to Sky.
All right, thanks, Simon. I'm Sky. I've been a part of AEE since 1983. My first conference was at Lake Junaluska. I've worn a lot of hats through my time with AEE. I was obviously a very dedicated member, and my first conference changed my life. I found my people and my purpose, and like many of you all. And I've been the director of accreditation. I've served on conference committees. I helped with the second Santa Fe conference back then when Rocky was still the executive director of the Santa Fe Mountain Center. That was his last conference, although he's visited us since then. And then current day, I serve on the Social Justice Task Force, and I'm really excited about the work that's going on there and the passion that we share with Sherry and her staff and with AEE and the board. So very excited about the future. And I pass to Will. Bring it on, Will.
Hello, my name is Will Marble. I currently live in Birmingham, Alabama. My first conference was also at Junaluska in 1984 as a student on a semester North Carolina Outward Bound course. Fell in love with, this is what I want to do for a living. I think it was maybe Dennis Kerrigan had a Z-drag set up on his Volkswagen Beetle, and I thought it was a pretty cool experiential activity. And went to Touch of Nature out of Southern Illinois University, worked there for about 10 years with a 1-year hiatus teaching gymnastics in Singapore. And there worked with Ted Wickman and Karen Hand, who some of you remember, I know. Then went to Voyager Outward Bound School for 5 years. Ran the outdoor program at Georgia Tech for 5 years, and I'm currently at the Alabama School of Fine Arts. And here's my title, hold on to your hats. It's Attendance and Conduct Manager. Wah, wah. So I was on the board for one stint, and I convened a conference from the Southeast that was not the most fiscally responsibly run one, but and Lee Gillis is fond of reminding me of that every time. And the big feather in my cap is that at the Vancouver, British Columbia conference, I met my wife, and we now have a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And it's so a life-changing experience that means more to me than one could ever express. And I'll turn it over. I think that's it, right?
Denise.
Oh, Denise. Sorry, Denise, who I worked on the board with for a little while.
I've been involved as an experiential education facilitator or leader since the late 60s. In my early years, I was a Girl Scout camp counselor, an instructor for some of the mainstream organizations, and the prerequisite ski bum. In 1977, with a few other women, I started an international adventure education and travel organization for women. And the mission was to help women and children learn outdoor living and traveling skills. Woodswoman Inc. offered trips in about 10 different countries, ranging from scuba diving to mountaineering. We taught and used trauma-informed leadership from the beginning of that. I became involved in AEE about 40 years ago at the 1982 conference. I gave a presentation about women in the outdoors, no surprise there. My positions at AEE have included president-elect, president, past president of the board, that kind of thing. Journal of Experiential Education Advisory Board, Publication Advisory Board, board treasurer, where I had to wear a hard hat because it was a little awkward time, but most of us have been through those awkward treasurer times. I've been a reviewer for the JEE, reviewer for the international conference, convened some conferences, past editor for the Women Professional Group newsletter, member of the Betty Vandersmithson Research Grant Award Committee, Accreditation Council member and Accreditation Reviewer, SEER Chair, and co-authored with Dan Garvey and Steve Pace and Nina Roberts, A History of AEE, co-edited with Karen Warren and T.A. Loeffler, The Theory and Practice of Experiential Education that AEE published, and co-authored with Dr. Etienne, or edited with Dr. Etienne, the Connecting with Essence Adventure Therapy Proceedings for the 4th International Adventure Therapy Conference. So that's sort of a bit of history. Now I'm on the Think About group for the awards committee and working on the Nina Roberts project with Sky and others.
Thanks, everyone. Such an amazing group of people here tonight. Really, those resumes, I know they're short, but wow, vast. And I know there's so much more in there. Thank you so much for all you've done for AE over the years. We're going to start with our first question. And I'm going to go to Denise first, just because I know she's got to get on a plane soon. I wanted to ask you, where were you in your experiential ed journey during this time, and what was the field like? So in the 80s, where were you, and what was the experiential ed field like? And if you could keep it to like 2 minutes.
It'll be fast, and I'm sorry that you'll hear a little bit of boarding things in the background with our airport with one airplane. My training and all that was actually as a counselor in training, CIT with Girl Scouts, and it was excellent in terms of understanding experiential education, understanding teaching in the outdoors. I can't say enough good about that. And I think that in the 80s, I was pretty focused on the organization that I was running. And we really were trying to be inclusive. We really did do trauma-informed care and leadership for all the people. We worked with survivors of sexual and other abuse, both young people, young women, and also older women. And because we were a women's program, we knew that lots of women would come on our program who had traumas, but we wouldn't know it ahead of time. And that led Roz Dutton and I to do an article called What Happens When you're running a regular program and there's somebody who has experienced abuses on that program. So that was an old JEE article. I'll pass to somebody else. And do I just pick somebody or?
That works, Denise, sure.
All right, well, go ahead, Dr. Gass.
I remember the Toronto conference, and we had dinner on a ship that had an unlimited amount of shrimp you could eat and open bar. And that the boat sailed off into the harbor, and Craig Dobkin and I were on there along with the rest of us. And it was like the very worst, it was like the perfect storm. You had all these rugrat outdoor leaders getting onto a place with free food and free beer. And now you know why we run into financial problems all the time. We literally sunk the association on that one ship that day for Toronto. And so many of my years on in the 80s was working with various people to try and get us out of debt so we could run the association. And there were 3 times where we ended up being $100,000 more in debt, and then trying to turn around and be $100,000 in the plus. And we did that 3 times in the 1980s. So that was a lot of my 1980s. But, you know, Craig and Rita just taught me how to teach at Towson State. So when I went to UNH, I went into the area where Jed had plowed the road with Dan Garvey, and then did that work, and then worked with Marianne Skippa, did a lot of substance abuse folks in Connecticut, and Eagleville Hospital really kind of got me thinking around treatment models that really affected me to this day. So it was quite a journey. There always was, the question is, they say, you don't say you want somebody, you need somebody. And I always felt the association came to me and said, we need you to do this now. And that's what I learned there. So Marianne, I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Mike. So just kind of keeping up with that, and something that Will, when you said it, I found my tribe or something like that. I found my people, and that's how it was for me. And I know in the 80s in particular, when I first, early 80s, I was still working with juvenile corrections, and you know, we had work built on the work of the Wilderness School and John Flood. I don't know if you guys remember John Flood, and working really hard to build a youth challenge program for incarcerated youth. These kids were incarcerated, they weren't in the community, and getting the state of Connecticut to allow me to take incarcerated youth out into the woods. And I found so much support. And you know, I found my peeps in AEE, and they were really, it's what allowed us to run the program. And I remember when we built the ropes course and we started, I wrote a grant, and REI sent me tons of equipment, like for $1,000. I got probably $5,000 worth of equipment. It was just amazing. And it was just this incredible experience. And I just knew this was where I was going. Now, whatever I was going to do in life, it was going to involve experiential learning, because, you know, I had found my home. I moved on from there in the mid 80s to work at the Connecticut Alcohol and Drug Abuse Commission, where, as Mike said, I looked at, I got to do something in the state of Connecticut that's more experiential, and took a little while to do the politics. But then I found, you know, my friends from UNH came down to help me to do the training and to begin to roll out some programs. And I was really proud. By the time I left Connecticut in '89 to move to work on a contract here in DC. And the folks had said, oh, these programs won't last. And the Youth Challenge program lasted until they ended the institution. They deinstitutionalized the kids, and there was no longer a place where the ropes course used to live and the program used to live. And so it lasted like 25 years. And so it was really exciting to see that it carried on, and it continued to do some really great work. And I continued on that journey when I came to DC and in the late 80s. And then I was working with Health and Human Services on an HIV project, rolling out trainings throughout the country to help health departments and mental health departments work together. And the whole program was based in a very rich experiential design. And so I really felt like, in all the while, I had resources like all of you. I can't even name how many of you on this screen right now were part of my team that helped me to work through and design that stuff. Within AEE, we continued to grow and move away from that Toronto experience. And that's where my work with Zeke on the Conference Advisory Committee is. We were really the strong center, so it was never left to just a couple people to figure this stuff out. That, you know, we really got clear on how we can make sure year to year that we are creating a space for this work to grow, and that we could fund ourselves to do it. So, and I'd like to shout out, I wish Zeke could be here, and he's sadly left us way too young. But he was just this amazing energy that did so much to help this organization recover from Toronto. So that's that. Who can I pass it to? Who has it? Will.
Thank you, Marianne. You know, I've been thinking about what might be valuable for me to add to this. And when I joined forces at Touch of Nature out of Southern Illinois University, I was working primarily 30-day trips with youth at risk. And the first lead instructor that I worked with was a Vietnam vet with a heart of gold, and had come from a BD school, behavior disorder school, and takedowns and things like that were commonplace. And I remember being out in the wilderness in Canada, and this kid had been misbehaving, and the lead instructor decided to put him on isolation at night and put him all by himself. So it was a time when I was a part of re-traumatizing people potentially, in a setting that was potentially valuable for folks, but we were learning a lot about what's going on. And it was a real eye-opening experience, the 80s for me, in what are we doing and what's happening. And it's also when AEE started looking at, and Ted Wickman was a big part of we need to talk about what we're doing and what are our standards, and which led to the accreditation. Now, like, look, what are common peer practices that we're having? I remember being in Wisconsin at either a regional conference or a national conference, and Mike Gass acknowledged the fact that there was some kind of giant carved Native American sculpture out there, and the misappropriation of that image, and acknowledged it. And I just thought, having been a camper at a camp that did the same, was like, oh, cool, Indian. And, began to have dialogue with others, and then did a few white men's caucuses with Bill Proudman. I guess that's getting into the 90s maybe, but it was an awakening, I think, certainly for me as an individual, and maybe as an association as well, on what are we doing, how are we doing it, and how can we do it more responsibly, and how can we honor the field and the people who are doing damn good work, and not getting the acknowledgement that's needed. I think it was in the 80s when the 60 Minutes did the wagon train, what was the name of that program, profile, and it got a lot of heat. And
Vision Quest.
Yeah, Vision Quest. Thank you. Yeah. And so, it was a big eye-opening experience, and wonderful to journey through personally. It has, it made me a better person, because I was around people who, there were a lot of conferences where it was challenging. There were challenging conversations, and they needed to be happening. Those conversations needed to happen. I'll finish with, a caveat I just now thought of. In my current educational setting, I think one of the problems we have is that it's hard for us to have hard conversations. I don't see hardly any one of the teachers and administrators being able to go to one another and have a hard conversation, saying, listen, I'm kind of frustrated at this. We have these conversations behind one another's backs. And so I think AEE certainly has given me the skills to be able to call it as it is, and trust that having dialogue helps us all grow. And I'll pass that to Simon, I suppose.
Thanks, Will. So in the 1980s, I was in grad school, and I was assigned to the steering committee as a student representative for the George Williams College on Lake Geneva, and that would have been 83, I think. I was assistant to Jim Kielsmeyer and Ellen Goldberg with the program and organizing workshops, and I remember there were so many workshops that I needed to create a timetable, if you will, that somebody said, oh, we should give this out to other people. And I know that became the insert in the years following for conference brochures. And I also remember I was collecting data for my master's thesis at the time, and I met Mike Gass and others and these folks became lifelong friends. And I remember Peggy Walker-Stevens encouraged me to submit my research when I was done to the journal. And that was my first publication that was refereed. But the thing I remember most about this conference was the quality of the people and the magic, excuse me, the magic of the location. So as a student, everybody took the time to answer my questions, and they engaged in dialogue with me around topics that many of my professors just didn't get. And all the while, they did this while going for a run in the woods or sitting in the grass. And so that felt like an inclusive community to me. The other thing was that this was outdoors beside the lake, and everyone was accommodated on site. Everyone took meals together. Everyone ran into one another, especially while walking between sessions, many of which were held outdoors. And this was an atmosphere unlike any other academic conference I had attended that far. It seemed to be that this was about sharing and caring, walking the talk, in the beauty of the outdoors, not in a sterile conference hotel where you couldn't seem to find the folks that you needed to speak with most. And quite simply, I was hooked. I'll pass to Christian.
Thanks, Simon. So the 1980s, early 80s, I transferred to Cornell to study social work and got immediately hooked on this idea of combining social work and outdoor stuff. I was working for Wilderness Reflections, which is now the Cornell Outdoor Program with Dave Mariah and Alexander Gayak, and trying to find literature in a library. And back in those days, you had to submit a request to get things that the library didn't have, and it took weeks. And in that, I discovered AEE and became fascinated with it, and didn't get to go until I actually had graduated, because I was a poor college student and we weren't sending vans of kids at that point in time. But we did send a group after I graduated, and that was my first regional conference. And what I remember about the 80s in terms of my passion is sort of looking at combining adventure and social work is that it was still a really nascent field. We were still called adventure alternatives in corrections, mental health, and special populations. There was no therapeutic adventure professional group at that point. It was a pretty loose group. In fact, I remember showing up to a keg with Mike Gass was there and trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do? And not much came from that, but it laid the foundation, I think, for the opportunity to get involved. And that was what attracted me. It was easy to get involved and to find a place to make a difference and to raise questions. And I think that set the stage for what was happening in the late 80s, which was some of what Will was talking about, some of the abuses. And I think it was in '89 that we had a death at a wilderness therapy program. And that became a rallying point for us to create a code of ethics that Mike really led the charge on, and really trying to begin to professionalize this work. And I see where we've come now in terms of now having a certification process with that AE is sponsoring. And we've come a long way. I will send it to Sky, I think. Sky.
Thank you, Christian. So let's see, it's interesting to be in such a reflective space right now, because I'll just do a caveat that there's a consortium of folks that are working on what we're calling the Dr. Nina Roberts project. And one of my reflection paper that I'm submitting for that project was basically about my career, reflection on my career, and specifically what it was like to be a young woman trying to make her way in a male-dominated field, and to really start to look at what it means to break the glass ceiling, and what it means to really start to embrace diversity. And so one of my first conferences, I was marked again at Lake Junaluska by signs that I saw in the bathroom, and signs that I saw in places where women were getting together to gather, to talk about, to create brave and safe space. And that stuck with me, and it had an impact on me. I never went to the meetings. But I thought, how great is that there are spaces for women to be able to acknowledge their career paths and to get support in their own trajectory in this field. And so that was very impactful early on, again, back in 1983. And so as I've been reflecting on my career, shortly thereafter, so there was a whole program, and Marianne, I don't know if you were in Virginia at this time, but it was called the Virginia Council on Outdoor Education. And that's where I got my start. I was an outdoor education and psychology major. I was an instructor and a field guide for our outdoor club, and that's what got me to AEE. And then shortly thereafter, I met Betsy Dalcleish, who some of you may remember. She was very active. Yes, thank you, Bob. And she was an amazing role model to me, a woman role model, and who helped me connect with the Santa Fe Mountain Center. So in the summer of 1983, I went out and I did a 2-week volunteer stint to take kids into the backcountry and teach them leadership skills. We did climbing and whitewater rafting, my first whitewater rafting trip in my entire life. Thank God I was in Rocky's boat on the Rio Grande when it was running at 9,000 CFS. It was rocking and rolling. And I can't remember, it was not Jim Kilsmeyer, but one of, I'm spacing out her name, but she popped out of the boat. There was a big old rescue, and it was like one of those epic, river trips that you're never going to forget. So, so I got my start shortly there. I worked in residential treatment in Richmond, Virginia, and then the Mountain Center said, "Hey, we want to start this residential treatment program in Eagle Nest, and we want you to come out and help run it since you've worked in residential." So I packed up my Zuzu Trooper at the time and I headed west, and obviously kept going west. I'm in Northern California now. And I was a field instructor for the Santa Fe Mountain Center for a number of years, doing, again, taking kids into the backcountry, what we called wilderness experience programs. Rocky studied with, he went to Colorado State along with Mike and Dan, and came down and started the Mountain Center with some other amazing people, and Jed, you'll remember all those folks, and basically really put the Mountain Center on the map because they took an adaptive outward bound approach, working with kids who were institutionalized, whether it was in a residential treatment or a correctional facility. And then I made my way up the ladder. I was like, I knew that I wanted to stay in this field. I knew I wanted to continue to have as much influence and grow and learn as quickly and effectively and efficiently as possible. And I knew in breaking the glass ceiling, I had to continue to get my education. I had to continue to dive deep into putting myself out there and acknowledging the challenges that the field have, but also really embracing the potential. And so, and then shortly thereafter, we'll head into the 90s, but I knew that I needed to advance my education. And that's when I connected. And Rita's been one of my role models. She was the board chair at that conference I spoke of earlier in Santa Fe. And I remember meeting her the first time there and being like, I want to learn from her. I want Rita to be my mentor. And guess what? She was, and she still is. And I owe her a debt of gratitude for the influence she's had on me and many other women and people in the field through her program at Aurora University. And so, yeah, so those are some things that really stick with me. I'll talk a little bit more about Nina before we wrap up, because I do think the focus on social justice then, and as we look at our history, the focus on social justice now has never been more important. So, so I just really appreciate that, and all of you. I know each and every one of you, almost all of you on this screen, and it's just amazing to see you all and be with you all. And my pronouns are she, her. Sorry, I forgot to say that earlier.
Thank you, Sky. Peggy, did you want to share where you were in your experiential education journey during this time and what the field was like?
Yes, so I was a high school teacher, and I went to a outward bound teacher program, and so at an AE conference, and then they put a letter out that said anyone could nominate someone to be on the board, or you could nominate yourself. So I said, hey, I'll just nominate myself. So I got elected, and I went to conference, and not anyone knew who I was. My understanding was they were asking Bob MacArthur and Jed Williamson are on these calls, like, well, so you're from New Hampshire, like, who is she? And I'm like, never heard of her. So I did not know one person when I went, maybe Keith King, like, was the only person I knew when I went to this conference. So that was interesting. I was glad, Sky, that you talked about the transition. So I was, again, in 1980, got elected to the board. Male-dominated organization for 2 of my 3 years on the board. I served, there were 9 people on the board. There were me and 8 white men. And also the organization was very nascent, as the word someone used, I think. And there were, the oldest person, I believe, was Bob MacArthur, who at the time was 35. And so I remember actually at the 25th conference, I was like, wait, you guys are still like heading up this organization? Why don't you leave room for the 20 and 30-year-olds, like, what is this? So here we are at the 50th, and here we all are. So anyway, so it's very nascent in that way. The other way I wanted to talk about because a lot of people here that have talked so far are in outdoor education. And I use the outdoors, but I'm a public school teacher. And currently I started an organization. It's a interfaith youth called Mosaic Interfaith Youth Action. So I work in other settings in the outdoors, although we certainly take the kids camping and things like that. And I think it was not as clear then. I mean, I remember having debates about this, that was the organization going to really try to do all the service learning classroom teachers at a conference, there would be 80 or 90 people at the classroom teacher interest group. And my impression is that's no longer really the case. And when I say classroom teachers, I'm not talking about college teachers. I'm talking about, you know, like middle school and high school teachers. And so that was a big thing, like, was that, you know, and what was the role? And I was saying earlier to the group while we met a little bit before the rest of you got on, what was, as I said, it was a journal editor. And what was the role of the journal? Was it, as it is now, an academic journal that if people could publish in, you know, Simon and Mike Gass and all the people who started doing that? Or I was arguing at the time that the vast majority of people were practitioners and it should be a practitioner's journal. And, you know, with hints and ideas and, you know, for your average, whatever, outward bound leader, your service learning person, and be of wider scope. So that was, I think, an interesting thing then. And in fact, I don't know that anyone knows this except maybe one person. A group of us actually met perhaps around 85 as to whether we were going to start a new organization that was service learning, some of the broader, you know, teaching and stuff, that AEE should be outdoor adventure. Like it was both a strength to have the broadness and a weakness, you know, because there was just so many different things going on. I know all those things are still going on to some extent, but it wasn't as clearly just an outdoor group then. And we actually met about 8 of us and thought it would be a good idea to start a new one, but nobody really could do it. Like people were running their own organizations at the time or whatnot. Like no one really, we didn't really think we could pull it off. So we didn't do it. But I think that's sort of an interesting sort of hidden story underneath of of that time.
Awesome. Thank you, Peggy. Thanks, everyone. Thank you all too for being so good with time tonight. I really appreciate that. Just throwing out there for anyone in the next couple of minutes, what have you seen come to fruition since that time, since the 80s? What have you seen that has changed, or that has that were your ideas or your hopes for AE at that time, and what have you seen that's come about?
I'd like to
go ahead. You go ahead. Go ahead, Simon.
Okay, thanks. At that time, I think the importance of facilitation was underestimated, and I wanted to see that realized. And I think it has, not necessarily due to me, but many people have written books about the techniques and skills that they use, and I think that's moved the field forward considerably. Go ahead.
I just had a memory, and Mike, I don't remember what year it was, but you were president, chair of the board, and you stood in front of the entire AEE conference, and you wore your jeans and you wore a shirt and tie, just to symbolize the fact that while we want to be outside, we need to come in so that we can make us not on the fringe. We need to be part of. And I think as I look now, we certainly have our things. I mean, one of my programs have become very risk averse, and we're, you know, with all the trends that go on, you got to go back and forth. But I think we're no longer fringe. And it always stuck with me, you and your jeans, and from the waist down, you were outdoor, and from the waist up, you were dressed with your shirt and tie on. And for me, it was a very profound talk that you gave that night. And I think as I watch over the years, it really did roll out that way.
Well, one of the things that I think works on that, and then I'll turn it over to Jen, is Brent Bell, because he's the person who's taken that kind of synopsis you've just given and woven it in together into the higher education and what he's done with the work there. So to see individuals like him riding forward, taking the traditional and not doing an either or, but a both and, to be very John Deweyan of that type. I think that that's the model of working those types of things. And Christian, the dual degree program at UNH, now we have an MSW, a dual degree master's program. Rita had seeds of that at George Williams with therapeutic rec and outdoors, and Christian's work is just mammoth effects for us on there. And I'm just proud to be associated with people whose pictures are here on what they've done there. Jed, go ahead.
I got just one quick thing, which is, Outward Bound, which is where my wife and I started. We taught together. She was one of the first women instructors, and I worked with all of you just about in this picture here. And the motto at that time was, it's for us to ignite and others to keep the flame alive. And I always thought that was fundamental bullshit, because keeping the flame alive is what everybody on this screen has been doing. And the most important message from that is keeping the flame alive. We've all moved on. We all moved on from those wonderful things that we did back then and kept the flame alive in our own particular way. And I admire all of you for that. Everybody on the screen, thank you and good night.
Thank you, Jay.
And a shout out to Craig Dobkin of taking those pieces and turning it into peace. Just the ultimate goal of all of us should be what he does there. And the wonderful memories that Nina has stirred up in all of us is a big emotion for me going on right now too. So
Yeah.
there's just wonderful pieces there.
I wanted to open the panel up for questions from any of our attendees tonight. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask any of these folks, or stories they want to share, or accolades, or anything like that.
I'll go. I just want to share what joy it is to see your faces. And for most of you, for the paths that we traveled together a long time ago. And a salute to each of you for what you're doing now and what you have been doing to make a difference. I really resonated to the comments about the transition from the Vibram soul kind of value that dominated, at least in the early days, to weaving our way into mainstream institutions and making our difference in that regard. So it's been a wonderful evening for me, and I salute each of you.
Other.
Well, I'll just share a few things back to your question earlier, Sherry, which is I do think that we've come a long ways and we've professionalized the field. We have a body of knowledge. I mean, there's the scholars that are on the screen right here, right now, who have produced amazing research and validation to continue for us to advance our impacts in a variety of settings. I know, my 16 years at the Santa Fe Mountain Center, I finally became the executive director there. New Mexico funds the Mountain Center and has since Rocky was there and founded the Mountain Center. And so we get mainstream funding. They get mainstream funding still to this day to help take kids and put them in novel environments to help, work on all the ththings that we know that can happen out there in the magic of the collegiates or then Big Texas. Will and I share, many stories of not being together, but being in Big Bend, Texas and seeing the transformation that kids go through. And then fast forward, the state of California. So right now I'm in Northern California, I'm a program manager at Valley Moon Children's Center. And there is funding coming in for us to have adventure and experiential experiences embedded in our treatment program still to this day. And I bring in the body of knowledge of many of the researchers on this call right now. And so I just think that's incredible that states are actually funding, I think more efficiently and effectively and in many ways than they have. And Mike, you could speak to that. And then my last comment is how much we professionalize in terms of all the people in this screen right here who have advanced accreditation, and making sure that we upped our safety standards, and not just the physical risk, but the emotional, spiritual, cultural, the whole humanistic piece of how we work with people in a more dynamic and sensitive and constructive way. So just a couple comments about some of our advances that I think are noteworthy.
Sky, within the next 2 weeks, have you heard of the Guardian publication? The newspaper, Guardian? They're going to publish an article on how AE accreditation has solidified and strengthened the field by what it's done in the iterations it's gone through. So it'll be a big celebration when that article comes out.
Right. So that's just a great current example, Mike. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I have something to share, if people can hear me. Great. Well, first, hi to Bob MacArthur. It's great to see you here. I apologize for having a bad hair day here, but I'm in the hospital recuperating, and hospital's a good place to do that. But I'm doing experiential education here. I'm doing activities with the nurses, with the CNAs, with the doctors. So it never stops. You're always doing it. We did a warp speed earlier today, and they just looked at me and said, wow, that was heavy. I thought they meant the ball was heavy. But I also want to remember 1980 when William Sloane Coffin said, if you don't fight evil, you'll become it. And if you don't change it, it will change you. And that really stuck with me about the role of experiential education. We also heard at that conference that entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity. Keep it simple. So that kind of caught me. It's kind of like a readiness for sensible self-denial from Kurt Hahn. I had the pleasure to be with Mike Gass and Rita. God, can you believe it? I'm with the two heavy hitters. They were hitting homers and I was drag butting the ball down the third base line. Thanks for everybody sharing.
Greg, it doesn't surprise me at all that you're organizing the nurses in the hospital. I still have fond memories of flying back to Colorado from a conference and you organizing activities in the plane. It's just so quintessentially you and what we all love about you.
Thank you, Christian.
And we did have a question in the chat from Danielle asking if we could only focus on 3 things to work on going forward, what would they be?
That's easy for me. I'm working really hard with a number of individuals. Those of you who are going to Nina's celebration, if you could say hi, shout out to Charles Thomas and Harry Grammer to try and change the color of the people in the kaleidoscope that's here. And really working hard with trying to train programs with staff of color and train organizations to support staff of color in that process there. And I'm seeing in the next 5 years a radical transformation of that color that we have across the screen. So that's something that's really got my attention and generalizing it and working hard on that together. So watch, it's coming down the road.
And I would echo that what Mike's saying, and it's not just color, it's just, you know, the whole scope of who we serve and who's here, who would be on the screen. And if we're doing another circle in 5 years, and you know, who would be in those positions leading and helping to carve out the next generation of how experiential learning will be out there helping people, all kinds of people.
So one of the things I'd like to see happen next is that we need to dissect the black box of what we do. We have not clearly communicated what we do publicly, so that has marginalized us in the mainstream movement of education and therapy and all sorts of other fields. If we put the amount of energy we have put into social justice and program accreditation and many other things the association has done successfully and celebrated over the last 5 decades, I think if we could take that same energy and apply it to figuring out how what we do works and figure out how we can modify that, change the dosage of that to deliver it in a more prescribed manner for our clients, our participants, then I think we'd be in a position to become more mainstream.
Hi, family. It's time to wash your hands and come.
Anyway, that's my 10 cents.
And I would say that, and builds off something that you said earlier, Simon, that is facilitation. In my experience, what differentiates AE's interpretation, understanding, application of experiential practice is in the way that we understand the depth of our understanding of the value of facilitation. I do lots of things with other groups that talk about experiential work, and most of them focus on the thing rather than the facilitation of the thing. And we spend a lot of time facilitating the thing, whatever that thing is. And I think that that is our power. And I think that Simon's correct that there's something in that black box we need to dissect more, but it is in that facilitation. And part of that is understanding our own role and place in the diversity, equity, inclusion world and what we need to do in order to be able to do that work and be a part of that conversation. And I think AE has not, in fact, I recall some really hard conversations. Nina and I would go at it several times, and I remember them fondly because it's the courage to have those conversations. And that's part of, I think, what we do really well.
Amen. I think for me, I do a lot of facilitation for grade level retreats that we do, and I'm always trying to contract people out. And I've contracted, I don't know, 7, 8, maybe 10 organizations throughout the state of Alabama, and I'm always left wanting. And there have been numerous times when I have co-facilitated with some of their facilitators, and they're like, "Wow, where did you learn that? And how did you do that?" And it's not, when Craig was talking about having worked with people who are like, I'm an underling. It's like, I'm not worthy. Like, I'm looking at the faces around here and I'm like, I have the basics. It's not rocket science, but it appears to be when I go out into the world, and there are people who can benefit from it. Now there's an economic piece and it's a transient work to hire out people, but there's value in that facilitative piece. Thank you for that. And they think it's gold when they're exposed, when they see it.
So I'm just going to tag on to the theme around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and the concepts therein. I do think we've come a long ways, but sometimes we forget our history, and we forget the strides, and we also forget the setbacks that have happened. And I think we have to get real and continue to do our own organizational and personal reflection around who we are in the work and how we can be a more diverse and inclusive organization in all its many forms. To your point, Marianne, I do think that's big work, and I see us moving in that direction, and I'm very appreciative of that. And there are a lot of superheroes who paved the way for that. And I'm just going to again acknowledge Nina Roberts, who continually challenged. I'm sure she had. I'm guessing she probably had challenging conversations with the majority of the people on this call right here on this Zoom. And she's left a legacy, and I think we owe it to her and to others. You think about all the other folks who didn't necessarily weren't able to find their voices, and what can we do to continue to uplift marginalized voices and the voices that have historically not been heard and sometimes valued.
Thank you, Sherry, for this evening.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say thank you, everyone. We're like right on the money like amazingly. So I really appreciate that.
Can I
It's
make
so
us a
cool that
little
you're
bit late?
doing this, Sherry, and with your team. It's really wonderful.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been really great to go through the history and find people and connect and talk to folks. And I know I'm still going to try to reach out to more people to get some more history. So we have that for our 50th, and we have that for our organization, because I think a lot of that is so important. And in that vein, also talking about visioning and what we can do for the future. At the conference in November, we're going to do a whole membership visioning session on the last day of the conference, and Michelle Cummings, who was on here, is going to facilitate that. And so, really looking forward to spending time with the membership and finding out what are some of those things that we want to see AE doing in the future. So if you don't have information about the conference yet, Anna has put it in the chat and you can check it out. We're going to be in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And going back to the camp and conference center type conference, not in a big hotel, everyone will be in the same space. We'll be sharing meals and that kind of thing. So it'll be really fun to see how that goes this year. And we're excited about having everyone. We're definitely providing spaces for students. We're providing spaces for seniors. We're providing spaces for past Kurt Hahn winners. And we're going to make sure that everybody feels hopefully welcome there. So thank you all so much for this evening. It's been lovely, lovely to spend this time with you. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Sherry,
you,
I'd like to
Sherry and
say one
Anna,
thing.
for hosting us.
Yeah.
Good to see everyone.
Nice.
Thank you, Sherry.
Hope to see you all in North Carolina.
Yeah, we'll be there.
I'm going.
Very good.
Yay.